You either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
In exploring Folktober, I didn't really know much about previously when I was reading the Yanagita Kunio's Guide to Japanese Folklore that there are many references with lost endings or fragments to stories.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were in the middle of I was in the middle of rewatching the TV show Mushi-Shi, which takes place in the Lost Era sometime between Edo and the Meiji era. I did kind of want to explore this idea of lost folklore and do the folklore adjacent film, Mushi-Shi the movie.
Sure.
As well as explore a movie that comes from an anthological series.
Yes.
Compared to what we're going to be kicking off Folktober with.
That's true.
So if you haven't guessed it, we're doing Mushi-Shi the movie.
Yes.
A very interesting movie to say the least.
It wasn't... It was a movie unlike what I normally associate with for a live-action recreation.
Mm-hmm.
However, I did not hate this movie. So, that says a lot.
Says something.
It says something. Though, a lot of people did hate this movie. The critiques of it are heavy and many.
Yeah, I can probably see why.
Yeah.
But for those unfamiliar, Mushi-Shi the movie, I'll probably just refer to it as Mushi-Shi going forward.
Sure.
Is based on the manga by Yuki Urushibara and screenplay by Sadayuki Murai and Katsuhiro Otomo and directed by Otomo.
Mm-hmm.
Mushi-Shi follows the story of a traveling Mushi master Ginkgo as he cures people afflicted from ailments caused by the mysterious Mushi.
Yes, those were a lot of words, and many of them meant nothing to most people.
We'll get into what the Mushi and the Mushi-Shi are.
Yes.
But for those out there who might recognize Otomo's name, he is the creator of the world-changing Akira.
Of course.
And if you don't remember our Akira episode, I believe we did mention at the end that Akira was his introduction into filmmaking, and he left manga to pursue filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
As well as he's done other stuff. He's written and directed the Cannon Fodder segment for Memories, as well as did the writing for the other segments of Memories. He's also known for Steam Boy and writing the screenplay for Rintaro's adaptation of Fritz Lang's Metropolis.
Mm-hmm.
And as for Murai, they've also been a major influence on the industry, having written the screenplay for Perfect Blue, co-written with Satoshi Kon on Millennium Actress, as well as worked with Otomo on Steam Boy and did a few episodes of Cowboy Bebop.
Some big names.
And in more recent culture, Blame, which I learned that's how it's pronounced. It's not blame, it's Blame.
If you say so.
Knights of Sidonia, and composition on the 3 CGI Godzilla movies.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. Mushi-Shi the movie stars Joe Odagiri as Ginkgo, Sao Omori as the rainbow hunting Nijiro, Mako Izumi as the Mushi Master, or the Mushi-Shi Nui, which Mushi-Shi is a Mushi Master.
Sure.
And Yui Aoi as the Mushi-Shi scribe Tanyu.
Yes.
And as always, to help people with tie foreign actors to other works, Odagiri appears as Bojamaru Mogami in the first live-action adaptation of Izumi, and is the lead in Shinobi Under the Blade, a movie based on the novel The Koga Ninja Scrolls, which weebs will probably know better from the animated version, Basilisk.
Of course.
Omori, on the other hand, you might remember him from earlier this year.
Yes, we've run in.
As Ichi and Ichi the Killer, as well as the voice of Kazama and from Up on Poppy Hill.
Yep, definitely.
Asumi, I don't think a lot of people in the West will be super familiar with her work. She is... The only thing I think people would know by name is she plays a role as a nurse in an episode of the live-action adaptation of GTO, Great Teacher Onizuki.
Okay, yeah.
And Pistol Ballet, which I watched last night and I do highly recommend. But other than that, I looked up like why her career was short. She had some scandals and she quote-unquote left because she wanted to be a mother instead.
You know what? Can't blame her for that.
No. As for Aoi, She is probably more recognizable as a voice actress as Shiro in Tekken Kinkreet.
Yes, definitely.
Sono Se in Redline. But in live action is Megumi Takani in the Rurouni Kenshin movies 2 and Legend Ends.
The Rurouni Kenshin is definitely where I recognize the face.
And also another really good adaptation of manga.
It is, actually.
And we do not have any resources for this episode, just
some basic Google.
I didn't even do anything with that. I just watched Mushi-Shi and came up with my own shit.
I had to do a little bit of Googling just because for those of us who maybe don't hear super great or have to use subtitles, I thought for a great portion of this movie that his name was Ginkgo. Not Ginkgo, Ginkgo. And Ginkgo is a tree.
Yeah.
Ginkgo is not the same thing as
No.
Ginkgo. And so I had to do a little bit of Googling because they kept saying words in the subtitles that I was like, is that word this thing? It is in fact not that thing. They're all not that thing.
Nope.
It's very upsetting.
So, Chris, before we get into it, what are we pairing Mushi-Shi the movie with?
Well, this one might be the most on theme we've ever been.
Yes.
Today we have Tozuya Sake, which has beautiful koi fish and is called the Living Jewel.
And fixing pronunciation, it's Tozai.
Sure. Bottle can't correct me. And then, because you are a good nerd, you in fact have little sake cups with Mushi-Shi on them.
Only because I did loot anime for a little bit, and that was actually before we even started the podcast, so I've had these way ahead of that.
They are surprisingly nice.
Yeah.
Cheers. That is very nice.
Very nice and light.
Yes. To go with the light plot of this movie.
Yeah, so Mushi-Shi the movie. We open on a very beautiful misty shots of the mountains. I like the colors at this point. It's very grainy and muted to try and give an old-timey feel.
Sure.
But I don't get the music because it's a lot of didgeridoo for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so there is some historical instruments that could work.
Like?
I don't know their names off the top of my head. But I do know that there are some instruments, especially the older Japanese instruments, that do have a similar sound to what we in Westerners hear as didgeridoo off the bat. I cannot confirm whether or not this song, though, is actually using traditional instruments, or if it is in fact didgeridoo, because I am not a trained professional for that.
No.
The trained professional did not watch this movie.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, and
he was not involved, so I was not given the full-blown, lowdown on the instrument and the historical presentation of this movie. But, from what I understand, vibe-wise, it does match fairly well with the Meijing, sound.
The what sound?
Oh, never mind. Not that word. Meijing. The Meijing era.
The Meiji?
Sure.
The Meiji?
The Meiji era.
I know I do the hard J, and it's not a hard J.
I don't know. But from what I understand, the sound is somewhat of a vibe that is correct.
Well,
but
it's also hard, too, because if we say it's from that era, that's the weird thing with this movie, is it's in between eras where it's not fully outside of the Meiji era, but it's also not... Well, no. It's not into the Meiji era. It's in between the Edo and the Meiji era, because it has some modern technology, but it's a weird lost time.
It is a very weird fantasy, and I did manage to dig up a little bit of info on why this one's a little bit weird, especially because we have such big names writing and directing this one. And from what I understand, the director was approached and asked if he wanted to make this in a period drama style, and he was like, "No, I don't think that would match."
But that's the thing too. If I'm not trying to compare it to the anime, but that's how the anime is too. Is that it is a period piece, but it's also not, because once again, it's in between times.
Well, and not just that, but when I say a period drama, those have a very distinct vibe.
You're talking Pride and Prejudice, or
that's a Western example.
Yeah.
But yes, a period drama is usually filmed a certain way. The lighting looks a certain way. Costuming's done a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand, while that was presented from the studio as we would kind of think this would be good, the director said, no, I don't think it vibes, and he didn't really like the creative, like, restrictions that put on him. He wanted to explore something a little bit more fun and free, and he was a fan. So, from what I understand, that is why this is not just, like, in between because of the source material, but in between just a layer on top of that.
Okay.
Which I think a lot of people picked up on from the criticisms that I was reading online.
It's kind of lost a little bit of direction.
A little bit, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, we do cut from this very beautiful opening to a woman and son walking, but gotta run because there's a landslide that kills the woman. And it's an interesting start to a series that, I mean, we got action for a series that is generally considered one of the more chill animes out there.
Yeah, and it's also very strange because you go into this movie knowing from the box art, and if you're a fan of Mushi-Shi, that this is going to be some form of fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't know much of the source material, you at least can derive a little bit just from, like, the DVD cover. The landslide is just a landslide. It just kills a man.
A woman.
Or woman. And, for, like, welcome to the start of the movie.
Yeah, well, it's a weird... I think it's trying to be mysterious because after she's dead, we see the kid trying to search for her and some white-haired woman looking on.
Yeah.
And I get what they're trying to go for, but I don't think it works so much because...
No.
Honestly, that's the one thing I was going to ask you, because they do even add Q marks into this movie.
They sure do.
Does the graininess work to make this feel old or mysterious, or...
No, it doesn't, and that's a little disappointing, because I don't hate how they have tried to interweave the past to, like, add a audience knowledge of, like, our characters' lore and background and all that, because it does fit with the original, like, styling. Like, I don't hate it, but it is not super clear when, like, what is what. You have to be paying attention to the cue card to realize what's happening where. Or when.
And then not even the cue card. I'll get into that because that is my biggest bitch about this movie.
It is very hard to know who is what and when.
Yeah, and I would have been absolutely confused if I didn't know Mushi-Shi already.
Yeah, it was confusing until I watched it twice after having then consumed more source material.
Yep. Did you ever watch the show Mushi-Shi, or?
After I watched this.
Okay.
It was maybe not the order to do that in, but oh well.
Yeah, well, I thought you had watched it before. That's kind of why I chose this one too, so.
It's okay, because honestly, usually I enjoy watching an anime movie before I start a show. Because I like spoilers. I like to know what's going to happen. So, like, if I can get my toes wet, get a little taste of, like, whatever superpower or over-nonsense or, like, the group dynamics, that's usually how I prefer to, like, consume, especially a bigger anime or, like, a really popular anime. Like, example, Bleach. I don't think I've watched all of the Bleach episodes in a very long time, but I do watch the movies so that I at least kind of know what's happening still. Granted, I know, not canon, don't care, it still works.
You know the characters going in ahead of time.
Exactly, and so, like, at least that tells me, like, enough about the show for me to judge if I want to watch the whole thing.
Well, that's hard with Mushi-Shi, too, because, as you know, there's not really many tying characters outside of Ginkgo and a couple others.
No, and for the most part, though, the movie does portray that fairly well. So, like, I did have a sense of, like, this is probably very episodic, that the only real character that's going to be consistent is our main character, and I was okay with that. So going from the movie to the show, not necessarily a bad choice. I did get my toes wet. I was interested in watching the show because I watched the movie. However, the movie is so freaking confusing that if you aren't familiar with the source material, I think it will leave you with too many questions to enjoy.
Yeah, and we'll get into that right now because we got cut from this scene to a title card transition in a snowy village with Ginkgo, and it tries to keep that part mysterious while also trying to set up this new character that we have no clue who this is. We know that maybe they're tied to the white-haired woman.
Yeah.
But he's even an outsider amongst outsiders. That's what this whole introduction is supposed to be, which we could have done without the landslide and everything and just started off right here.
I think we should have just started off with him because, yeah, the landslide also happens so early that by the time it's, like, relevant again, I've forgotten about it.
Yeah, because immediately after we get to the snowy town, he's asked to meet the elder and to examine a group of people with a mysterious disease that makes them deaf in one ear.
Yes.
Which, I will say, I do like a lot. That's the one thing I do enjoy about this movie. There's a lot of cool compositions in this.
There is. Visually, this movie does look nice.
Some of them are a bit overexposed, and I'll get into where those are at.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a beautiful movie, but it's a nice looking movie.
Yeah, but in this scene specifically, next to the candle, Ginkgo is the brightest object in the room.
True. He has the uber white hair that's really standing out.
Uber white, and also the way he's lit, everything else is kind of in shadow, and it makes him feel that much more like, maybe like a godsend kind of thing.
Sure, I can see it.
Or a light in the dark.
I like it. Poetic.
But this is where we get the slight exposition on the Mushi, about there are these creatures, and their name comes from a Buddhist chant. Can't find exactly what Buddhist chant, but...
Yeah, I didn't look that hard either.
But yeah, here's what I like about them bringing up that line, is that even in this fictional folklore, it is like somehow Shinto and Buddhism have overlapped, where Mushi-Shi is overlapped with traditional medicine / they're also kind of, the Mushi-Shi are almost yokai-like, but in a more...
They're definitely monsters.
Here's the thing, I wouldn't even say they're monsters. They're yokai-like in that they're strange creatures, but they're more naturalistic and they're more primordial, where they have like one function in their life, but they're not there to harm or cause damage. They just happen to do that.
Sure. During my Googling, because I was confused by words, did find that according to one source, Mushi-Shi could be retranslated as Bugmaster. And I see it. If you go into this understanding that there are magic bugs, this movie makes a lot more sense, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're...
Because everything acts bug-esque. Things living in ears, like burrowing, the things living in the corner like little spiders.
That's right, because it's very primordial, because we don't get to like the mountain gods or some of the more advanced Mushi-Shi that we see in the show.
Yeah, in the movie, the bug theme runs really nicely.
Yeah, I actually didn't think about that, because there's a lot of bits later on where we get the cicadas, and it feels very... I think I even have it noted that it feels like mayfly to columns.
Yeah, like there's a lot of scenes where he's like breathing in bugs, and I just have that like image of people breathing moths in when they sleep. Like the old cartoons of like people snoring, they breathe in a moth.
I'm thinking Kung Pao.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, yes, like knowing that this is based more on the bug lore of Japan than like actual like yokai lore, I think helps a lot. But I think it's the lesser known version of lore, because it's more like nature based. It's a little bit loose.
Yeah, and it makes it even more magical when he does find where the big nest is, and the other villagers can't see it because it's quote unquote too dark, but he can see them clearly.
Yeah.
So just adding more so that maybe he's not just some traveling medicine man. He's there's something else to Ginkgo that, other than being white-haired. And
him seeing the, like, cluster in the attic corner reminds me so heavily of Ghibli's Soot Sprites, where only the kids can see them clustered in the corner like little bugs.
Oh, yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Again, showing that overlapping of where these fantasy worlds tie into, like, the yokai of everything. Because Spirited Away, as fanciful as it is, the Soot Sprites really only appear in, like, My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away, which are still heavily tied to the real world.
And to nature, too. Yeah.
But I also like that even though they're kind of in between spirits and the physical, they're still treated by medicine. No real praying or anything to cure the Mushi, but back to that traditional folk medicine. Specifically, he uses rock salt and candled senburi, which is also known as Sweteria japonica, and it's a bitter herb that's used in traditional Japanese medicine. So things that maybe we wouldn't have known, and I don't really know traditional medicine at all either. So it's something to find interesting. Yeah, and I like that the way the movie handles him curing people does a nice job of like setting up very quickly and clearly like what the show honestly takes quite a while to like really get you into, as far as like what his role in society is. Even though he's an outsider, they still see him as useful when there's a problem. Yes, he is. He's a medicine man, where he's just kind of there, or he's a more traveling one. Yeah. But it also is showing that he's a salesman, because he's like, oh yeah, that one's on the house. Everything after this, you guys got to pay for. I wish they had leaned in a little more to that in the movie. Just because this is the only scene that we really get him, like, using it to, like, make himself money in any way. Yeah, not being as chill, being a little bit more shrewd and, what's the term? A little more business-like.
businessman.
No, I was just thinking more, he's a little snarkier in the show than he is in the movie, which is fine. I mean, the movie is a completely different thing from the show. But
it is, but I think it adds a nice dimensionality to him where the show does, like, the characters feel very real and rounded and whole, even if you don't see them for very long or they don't return in the story. Whereas the movie, like, everyone feels pretty 2D.
Oh, God, yeah. And even the depth they try and...
It doesn't work because they're almost not the same person, because we're using that big time jump to, like, build the, like, character depth, as opposed to, like, adding these little moments of him, like, trying to sell the, like, the prevention or the cure. Essentially, like, you can worm yourself for $10 for a whole season.
Yeah, well, and it also, like, it shows the nature of this movie, too, that it's going to be a little bit slower, because it takes us 15 minutes to learn our protagonist's name.
It does. This movie, from the get-go, minus the landslide, which feels super out of place once you know this, the whole movie is paced very slowly, and I actually liked it. I know a lot of people don't, because there's not really a climax to this movie, not really. Not a big climax, not an important one. However, I kind of like it this way. And because, to me, Mushi-Shi is like a slice of life styled, even though it's fantasy, even though it's not real time period, honestly, like, it feels slice of lifey, and the climaxes in slice of life movies or TV shows is honestly like, I got an A on my test. Good job.
Yeah.
And, like, I appreciate that the movie took that route. Like, we have some big moments, but they're big life moments. Granted, it's in a fantasy world with, bug monsters, but still, it's not as impactful as, like, a fantasy action or even, like, a normal drama.
Yeah, no, and that just shows that it's trying to play into its source material as best it can.
Definitely, and I liked it. I know a lot of people didn't, though. That was, like, the number one complaint.
No, I'm okay with it being slow. I mean, what did you expect from the Mushi-Shi show to be turned into a movie? It's gonna be slow.
I think a lot of people who saw it like I did without seeing the show first, it did feel weird, especially in this first 30 minutes, because you are, like, still remembering, like, oh, we did have some action, and we've been introduced to bugs, monster things, maybe, and then, like, another 30 minutes goes by, and you're like, okay, so no action?
Yeah.
It is a little confusing from just by itself movie standpoint, and I'm a firm believer that if you're gonna have an animation, like, adaptation to live action, it does need to stand by itself.
Yeah.
At least a little bit.
No, I can definitely see that. And, I mean, we'll get into it, because there are... That's the thing is, I don't think it's so much that it's slow for me. It's the pacing of, like, and organizing of everything, because if they tried interweaving things a little bit better, I think I would have liked it, because...
I can see that.
Right from this part, we go to a flashback with some kid named Yuki, the kid from the beginning, and the white-haired woman, and...
I developed your hatred of flashbacks due to this movie. I'm not gonna lie. There's too many flashbacks.
Well, and they don't explain it at all. Like, there's nothing cueing it. It's not like he goes to sleep and it's supposed to be like a dream. It just cuts from him curing people to him follow...
To the child.
Yeah, but it showed, surprise, surprise, Yuki's Ginkgo. I'm just gonna say it
It's not really
there.
that much of a surprise, even though the movie would like it to be.
Well, if you don't know the series, then yeah, it is a bit of a surprise, because now it's just cutting back to randomly kid from the landslide and this white-haired woman. I
won't lie. As someone who watched movie first, show second, I did think that there was, like, a Witcher-style clan of white-haired people that were the Mushi-Shi, because the only Mushi-Shi that the movie shows you for the first 30 minutes is Ginkgo and the white-haired lady that we haven't properly been introduced to. And so I assumed that there was, like, a Witcher setup, like, the Mushi-Shi have white hair.
So I'm gonna show the side of nerdiness I don't have. I've never watched The Witcher or played the games. The only
disappointed in you.
Only thing I know is toss a coin to your Witcher, and that so many women had lady boners for Henry Cavill as...
Well, it's just that's just Henry Cavill, and he dirties up really nicely.
Grimes up good.
He does grime up good, and that's just Henry Cavill.
Yeah. Also, if you try killing the cows, they send a really hard boss to you.
Yes, they do.
That is my extent of Witcher knowledge.
Okay, so to fill in just a little bit of your Witcher knowledge, because I think most people have at least know a little more than you about Witcher, just because it was so popular. It's a bit like Game of Thrones. Even if you haven't seen it, you at least know there's dragons and it's weird. And there's, like, incest stuff happening. So the Witcher whole premise is that they have monsters, but it's more westernized, right? Because I think the author of the original books is Swedish. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's Swedish.
Oh, I didn't know it was based on a book series.
Yes, I have some of them. They're very good. You would like reading them. But, like, there is a group of people who kill or protect you from the monsters, and all of them are white-haired badasses.
Oh, so he's like, okay.
That's why I thought all of the Mushi-Shi had white hair, because this movie spends too long to introduce you to anyone else if you haven't seen the show.
Yeah, and even then, the other Mushi-Shi
are weird.
They are brief for the most part.
They are brief. So I assumed that all Mushi-Shi were weird white hair people, because I just saw the show second. And so I was like, oh, so all of the white-haired people, that's how they know he was a Mushi-Shi, was because he's got white hair.
No, it's the medicine.
It's the big old bag.
Yeah. Okay. I see the point you're getting, or where you're coming from there.
I'm not gonna lie, I was a little disappointed to find out that the Mushi-Shi weren't dope. It's just the one.
I mean, in the show, there's like 2 other really cool ones.
There is, yeah, in the show there is, but the movie really just you kind of assume he's the only one.
Yeah. Well, and this is why, like, these flashbacks piss me off so much, is because, honestly, even knowing the series, it was a little confusing to, like, try and remember, like, why are we doing it this way? Like, I understand the series is episodic, but you don't have the movie set up to be an episodic movie, where you easily could have. Or use this as the prologue, and then cut to Ginkgo, because, I mean,
the constant whiplash I was getting from knowing too much about this man's childhood that he doesn't even know. Yeah, no, that's the thing, is, like, this whole cutscene is that's what I refer to these as cutscenes. They are cutscenes.
This one is just to show that he sees Mushi at a young age.
Yeah, which is stupid, because, and especially if you are a fan of the show, because after I watched the show, I realized that the show really spends very little time talking about his past. Yeah. Like, very little compared to how much the movie spends.
Or the movie tries to spend.
It does spend an awful lot of time trying to tell us about his past, and I don't care.
Yeah, in 26 episodes, Ginkgo's past is only explored, like, maybe in 3.
Yeah, no, I think that number's right. Because I was surprised when I watched the show how little, like, there is about the background.
And I'll clarify, season 1, I recently found out that there is a second season. I have not watched that.
I also haven't watched the second one. I watched enough of the show to understand what the hell was happening in this movie, which was a good amount, but not all of it.
Yeah. But even from there, like, we learn, okay, he can see the Mushi. Now we got cut back to Ginkgo in the snow village. He's asked to stay because someone else has symptoms that are different. They're similar, but they're different from what they've got.
And I'm not gonna lie, this is the part of the movie where I was like, oh, maybe that was just a little accident, a little bad editing, a little bad writing, where we had too many flashbacks at once, but now we're gonna really get the ball going. I was wrong. Nope. Because while this is cool, while him curing people is the best part, because honestly that's the most of the show, is like him dealing with the different Mushi.
Yeah, figuring out how to cure people.
Yes. This is the best part of the movie, and I'm kind of sad we didn't just do this for the whole thing.
Yeah.
Even spend the whole movie just doing, like, 2 Mushi. I would have been happy.
We're doing some of the better ones, I'll say that.
I would agree, because while I enjoyed... The ear mite Mushi were kind of cool and a good introduction. They're quick, they're easy to get rid of, and they're relatively harmless, as far as the show shows.
Yeah, well, and so here's the thing with that, too, is... Real quick, we learned that... Yes, Charlie. We learned that there's another type of Mushi in this area that gives someone horns. And
does look cool.
It's adding more mystery, and it's the opposite of the Un, which were the first Mushi. And these are the Ah, but they're not in the ear. Which is setting up that even the Mushi-Shi don't know everything, and they have to do their research. So you do get a little bit of him trying to solve this.
And I do like the solving portion, too. It does feel like we're along for the ride as far as learning with him. And, like, his detective work is explained, I think, nicely. This part of the movie is shot fairly nicely. I think it looks pretty good. The horns look good. The CGI looks fairly good.
Yeah. He's just a trench coat and a droopy dog away from saying one more thing.
Yeah, actually.
But it also is a part to set up that... the solutions that they can think of initially aren't always there, and that the Mushi also have their own life cycle.
True, which was interesting, and I'm disappointed we didn't explore more.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also giving Ginkgo a bit of a natural curiosity.
Yes, again, which would have been really helpful if we didn't spend so much time with him as a child. Because we lose it.
Or just walking with a very nicer Ichi. Less crybaby Ichi.
Actually, though. Because, him being a bit of a businessman, a little bit of a wheeler and dealer, and him having this natural curiosity and willingness to help people is good backbone for character development. And then we just kind of, after this scene, yeet that right out the window.
A little bit, because, he finds the girl's secret lair, and there is one thing I like with the editing here. Mm-hmm. There's no music, just sound effects, good portrayal. That's some of my favorite portrayal of winter.
Oh, definitely. And I know I've been complaining a lot. However, the acting in this movie is really good, even from the children actors. Stellar acting. Was fully into the characters, was really enjoying it, even with the dub.
She felt like a girl, because we learned that her mom had the same symptoms earlier, and you do feel like it's a child dealing with the loss of her mother. She's become a recluse, she doesn't want to talk with anyone. Not doesn't help that she's sick, technically, But,
and also the little cues on, her mother would cover her mouth or her ears, and she's copying her mom.
Cover her ears, not her mouth, just the ears.
Yeah. And so, it goes on to, show that she's copying her mom, she's picked up some of her mom's habits, and, it does feel very natural. The acting in this movie is phenomenal, and there are scenes that are very beautiful. Some of them are a little out of focus, but this scene in particular looks really good. I really was involved and, enchanted with the relationship the two of them had together.
Well, and also her interaction with Ginkgo it shows she's very guarded. Just she has that one memento from her mom, and then this is when the random ass flute music comes in. But it does. It helps build it in some way. It helps build that mystery because it's been so quiet up until this point. It's ooh, mystical flute music.
Well, and it's also just cliche enough to cue you in. Because the mysterious flute music passing through the woods is enough of a cliche to, give you an idea of what to be expecting. Yes,
because he does find another cluster of Un. And I do like that what the scene also shows is that the Mushi are drawn to Ginkgo. And they're simple and instinctual.
Yes, that's true. Still
building the mystery of why this man's important, but not only that, the Mushi are coming to him.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. It does do a good job of showing that. The quality of the visuals of the Mushi are varying. Yeah. Some of them look much better than others.
Well, it's hard to compare a physical shell to some ethereal thing. And granted, we also got to take that step back. That Japanese cinema doesn't have the same practical or same special effects budget as many other movies in the U.S.
I agree, but the budget was $8.5 million for this.
Yen or dollars?
Dollars.
That's still a relatively low budget movie.
It is. It's just one of those very odd, details. If the whole thing had been grainy just a little bit, but the CGI looked consistent, I don't think I would have noticed, but the CGI is fairly inconsistent with the Mushi. They go from being soot spritey but glowy to, kind of mushy looking.
Yeah, I think that works well with just how mysterious the Mushi are, though, where they're not all constant.
All right, I can accept that.
But I understand where the Un in one scene don't look like the same in the next one because he tests out the theory of them attacking him in his sleep and shit.
Yeah, and I was immediately disgusted by him breathing them in. Absolutely not. No, thank you.
Yeah, and you know what? What's better than a horrible night's sleep with Mushi?
I don't know what.
Being interrupted by another fucking flashback with Yoki and Nui.
Actually, though, for real, I feel like if we had skipped several of these flashbacks, I would have been much happier.
I think we could have just done without these flashbacks altogether, to be honest.
I could have accepted one single flashback of a singular one at one point.
One solitary dream of some kind. When he's fucking comatose later. Use that to explain it.
Yes, I would have been very happy with that, but this is now too many flashbacks. And at this point, even if you hadn't watched the show, you now fully are oh, that's him as a kid. Because they're not subtle about it. No. Even though I feel like they were trying to be kind of sneaky into, leading you leading you on as opposed to like...
Yeah, it's like it's telling two stories at once, and you're trying to figure out how does story A really relate to story B.
And unfortunately, story A is very fully fleshed out and has a lot of back stuff to go off of from the show, whereas story B has 3 episodes and is very limited.
Story B has a single episode.
True.
Everything outside of that is after that episode.
Very true. No, like, there's not enough there to make it as interesting as the rest of the world.
No.
And so every time the child shows up on screen, I stop caring.
No, exactly. And here's the one thing I will say, is at least these segments are slightly overexposed, so that way we can... there's that little bit of difference, but it's such a little difference that it doesn't matter.
It's so small that honestly it just kind of looks like bad editing at times.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there's just no, like, there's more explanation on the Mushi and hinting that they're potentially more dangerous, which there's not even a build-up. We go from these, like, kind of annoying Mushi to one that we know can kill someone.
But it's killed someone in the same way as, like, a disease
or,
like, a parasite that you get, not like, oh, it's attacking. And I know that that's what these flashbacks are trying to, like, not even that subtly, like, build up to, like, oh, yeah, see how they've interacted so far, well, what if they actually attacked you? But, like, what if that was just a surprise later? I feel like it would have been much more impactful to learn that they rip your eyes out later. Yeah,
and I can see where they're coming from, because they're not explicit in tying the white fish to the white hair.
No, but it's so obvious.
It is obvious, but I think it's obvious in a nice way, where it's like, okay, the white fish tied to this woman with white hair. Okay, how does this relate to Ginkgo? I see where they're... I do too. I see the little threads that they're trying to weave everything together, but it's just so out of nowhere.
It is out of nowhere, and it's also a little too aggressive, I think.
Yeah, because it's right after... Well, here's the thing, is because it's right after he cures this girl.
Yeah.
And also, by the way, her, like, horns breaking and her freaking out over him smashing the horn is great, too.
I liked that. It was very good.
Very cute. But right from there, we cut to summer with Ginkgo on the road.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind the cutting with Ginkgo if it wasn't for the fact that we also cut to him as a child too much.
Yeah.
If it had just been more episodic, kind of like some of the old samurai movies do, where it's like, he was in this town, cut, now he's on the road, traveling west.
You're thinking more Zatoichi.
Definitely has the vibes there, but it's just too many cuts. It's too much happening for a show that's supposed to have almost nothing happening.
I think that's the thing, is Mushi-Shi does have a lot happening for it.
It does, but it's one at a time.
Yes, no, exactly. I think there could have been other stories that would have done that would have been a better way to explain the Mushi-Shi, especially like the very first episode where he's drinking from the cup of life and we're learning what the Mushi-Shi are. We learn about the river of light and... Yeah, no,
just anything would have been, I think, a better go. Because, like, I get wanting to have him have the mysterious past.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't work. And it's throughout the whole film.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I have a feeling that Otomo got a little distracted from doing anthology films and thought he could apply that to Mushi-Shi.
I can see where the idea could definitely be there. It's almost like no one, like, tested the idea first.
No, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I think changing of seasons is a good way to show progression of time and make it episodic. But I do wonder, like, how they could have done a little bit more of a clean transition between, okay, he just cured this girl in the winter, now we cut to summer.
Mm-hmm. Get something.
Yeah. I get where they're trying to put these flashbacks in to try and break up these scenes, but it still makes this harsh tone that just doesn't work. They could have done something in a similar line if he leaves to be a little artsier, kind of like what they did in The Secret of Kells, where he walks from winter into spring, into summer, into winter. Like, just do something, like, very subtle and simple, or do an in-between episode of
something else.
Exactly.
No, I agree. I also think do something subtle and simple with the background and, like, the backstory, too. Incorporate the white fish into other scenes, even though it's, part of his memory or something like that.
Yeah, well, and even in this scene, I mean, they're doing little things of trying to build the world, but they don't build it enough, because we get to learn that there's a little bit of a network between the Mushi-Shi. This is where we see the only other Mushi-Shi outside of the scribe. And I wouldn't even call her a Mushi-Shi. She's more of a nerd.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a variant of Mushi-Shi, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's also a way to set up Lady Tama at Tomyu's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a simple setup, but it's also where we're introduced to his now traveling companion, some dude who's trying to catch a rainbow.
I don't care about this man.
Yeah.
At all.
But that's the thing, is like, this feels like it's that transitional segment to set up the last two arcs, the traveling companion and of the Coda Rainbow. Like, you could have had that one big arc.
Yeah.
And then we have this arc with him where it's like, okay, we've gone from there, we've cut to summer, and this is the transitional one.
I could have seen that, but alas, this man is just kind of thrusted upon us for us to, like, learn about, and again...
We don't learn shit about him.
We don't learn anything about him, and I understand after watching the show how that kind of ties into the original ideas, but it just doesn't work in the movie format.
No, exactly. Because the trip continues to Tanyu's, and we get more exposition of why this place exists, the record keeping of the Mushi-Shi. I mean, it's fine.
It's cool, but, like, it doesn't feel like it goes very far.
Well... It makes me feel like how Sekien collected these yokai stories.
Sure.
Where he talked to people while he traveled, or traveled to people to collect stuff. Same with Yanagita Kunio and his Guide to Japanese Folklore. I
mean, a lot of the old folklore stories are similar in like, someone went around and collected them.
Yeah, Brothers Grimm.
Yeah.
Which is referenced a handful of times in the other Japanese folklore, because Brothers Grimm did it way before, and they're like, why didn't we do this?
Oh, yeah.
But the thing with that, though, too, is... And that's a hard thing with that. I actually was talking with my brother about this because he's introducing his fiance to anime and whatnot, and she's having a hard time with some of the stuff because there's a lot of exposition. Like, he tried getting her to watch Jujutsu Kaisen.
There is a lot of exposition,
and he's like, I didn't think about that. And I'm like, well, yeah, it makes sense because you have this absolutely strange world that at times is almost impossible to show without telling.
That's true, especially for some of the big fantasy ones.
Yes, especially when you're trying to explain a magic system. At least, and that's the thing with, like, he wants to get into Bleach, and I was thinking about this, at least Bleach, instead of, like, other series where they're, like, super serious about explaining everything, Bleach breaks that up a little bit with Rukia's really shitty drawings.
That's true.
So it adds that little bit of comedy while trying to explain everything, so it breaks the pace of the seriousness.
I agree. There's both too much and not enough explanation in this movie to, like, feel like it is useful in either direction. There's too much explanation on backstory nonsense, even with characters that we don't care anything about.
Yeah.
Versus, I would love to learn more about the world, and she seems like a great character to do it with, but we don't really explore that. Yeah.
Well, and we don't, because right after we'd spent, like, 3 minutes with this new guy and 5 minutes setting up the traveling. Yeah. We're back to a flashback with no warning. Like, it's not even a rest.
No, it's literally out of the blue. And it's not even like, oh, he's seen things to, like, trigger memories. No, it's just hard cuts.
Yeah, no, it cuts to Nui trying to ditch him.
Which is a little mean, but I get it.
Yeah. Well, and it's also it's another exposition piece for Tokuyama, or to explain the Tokuyama, and that Mushi-Shi consume other Mushi-Shi, the concept of a food chain within the Mushi-Shi, not just that the Nui turn into the or whatever they they briefly explained that one. But I do get this scene a little bit to show it's a dumb kid who's not listening.
Sure, but it feels too much like, hey, do you want to know backstory that our own character doesn't know?
Yeah.
It feels too forced.
And it's just rushing their relationship together at the very, like, to the very end. Like, it doesn't...
And honestly, if we had learned almost nothing about his relationship with her, and just were told at, like, one point where his memories are clearer, that would have been fine.
Yeah.
It would have been the same effect.
I will say, there are two cool things I think about this scene. One, this is where we learn how he became Ginkgo, because it's the one name he remembers. He was going to be consumed by the Takoyami.
Yeah.
And to follow the light, yada, yada, yada. This is where we get his white hair. But I will say, this is where the movie dips its toe into, like, the horror elements of the Mushi-Shi.
And I could have honestly done with more of it.
Specifically, my favorite shot of this movie, it's a very simple shot, is her holding the rope and just the light over it. Because
it does look really cool.
This thing that's supposed to be horrible is so beautiful at the same time.
Very true. And, like, there's a lot of putting fingers fully in eye sockets in this movie, which is a little surprising compared to how, like, mild the rest of the, like, spooky elements could have been. Because, like, I mean, we do have elements of body horror that could have been explored.
No.
Ears, bugs in ears, horns on ears could have been grosser.
Yeah, but
ink blood could have been grosser.
So that's the thing is, like, it's transformations, but it's not gory.
No,
and that's why it's not body horror.
Could have been though. Could have been because we're over here digging out people's eyeballs.
Barely. It's for like 5 seconds.
I know. We could have done more.
No,
we could have.
Yeah,
Towards the end of the movie, if it had built up to that level of danger throughout the whole movie, I think I could have been more interested.
If I'm still alive when the copyright for this stuff expires, I'll make you a body horror, kind of like what they're doing with Winnie the Pooh.
Thank you. Winnie the Pooh didn't need it. There was no elements of horror.
Oh,
there were elements of horror in this.
There's a Pooh-niverse coming out.
I'm aware. I'm aware. But that is people projecting their spooks onto a cute teddy bear.
Yeah, I also just can't think of that series without thinking of Poontang.
Sure.
I mean, it's Pooh-niverse.
Sure.
Poontang.
All right.
But I will say, there is another part of this movie I appreciate. You remember from our discussion with SP Film Viewers on Dreams.
Yes.
The slow motion in this works so well because it's only used in this scene, really.
True.
And it's for floating through an ethereal space.
That is true. I will say that while I liked the slow motion, I did not dig the weird 80s styling choice of floating through the ethereal space. It was giving children's photos at Kmart. Just a little bit too much.
I dig it, though.
It was kind of cool, but this is the only place that we have this style. It doesn't even match the original show in any way.
No, not at all. I mean, granted, you have to you have to adapt it to its medium.
I agree. Adaptation is needed, and I like the floating. It does tie in with the fish and the water and the mushi that we have now been introduced to, the takoyaki, which I called it for most of my research.
Less delicious.
It is less delicious, much more slimy looking.
I do love takoyaki, though.
They're very good. But it's the way that this movie is not terribly consistent with how it films things is just an odd choice to me. I don't hate it, but it's just a weird choice that I wish someone would, like, I wish there was someone on production or the director had time and, like, felt it important enough to, like, explain. It
makes me think that maybe these would have been better shot in different styles other than the slight overexposure. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It almost felt like the director had been inspired by, like, 70s and early 80s fantasy movies, like, especially, like, American-style ones, which had a lot of the similar, like, shot and, like, ethereal theming. Yeah. And yet this is the only place that style is used, but I kind of dig it, and I could have, if it was anywhere else, it would have made more sense. Well, and I think that's the issue, is it's only used here. It is only used here. If that was the style for all of his children, like, shooting, maybe I would hate them less. Yeah. Well, no, because, like, the kid wanders off, and it's just... He literally is, like, just beelining it out of the pond. Yeah, and we cut back to the blast of cicadas on the trail. Yes. And we get a little bit of backstory on Jinro, which... I don't care. Yeah. I don't care. Because he's, like, we know he's not staying around. Even if you've never seen Mushi-Shi, the show, before, you get a vibe that this character is not staying. Well, and also, he's so annoying. He's not annoying. He's fine. He's not that annoying. He's just... Compared to everyone else, he's boring and a little bit too annoying for me to enjoy. Yeah, no, I get that. Like, he is annoying. He's not as annoying as Ichi gets later on in the series, but... That's true. That is a fact. But he's only there just to expand other Mushi-Shi because we get more exposition. That's the other thing is, like, we get so much exposition about what these different Mushi-Shi are, and it doesn't fucking matter.
No, it doesn't, because unlike the show where it does build up and you do see all these other ones, and it leads to, like, these, like, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the movie never does that. The biggest one we've already been introduced to.
Kind of. I mean, this is the one we get into more introduction to. We get the Koki, which are the source of Mushi life.
Yeah, and, like, I get it. It's cool, and I like that it's all thought through, but, like, this doesn't necessarily help a whole lot anywhere in the movie.
Well, it's also weird, too, because it's paired with them right after this looking into the distance, and there's some solitary streetlight in the middle of a fucking mountain, and it's just a bit of modernity with electricity starting to reach the country, and there's the stupid line of, soon night in Japan are going to look like day. And it's one light in the distance. How can you guys predict a singular light? Have you guys seen light poles before?
See, okay, this was also a scene that, like, I didn't really understand even after having watched the show, because I felt like the show spends so much time focused on nature and, like, a very historic styling, even if it's not, like, truly historically accurate. And then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, by the way, the people over there, they have electricity and stuff. We don't. So, like, but I just wanted to tell you about it. It's like, why did you tell me about that? I could have lived my whole life without knowing that.
Exactly. Well, it works a little. I get what they're trying to go for. I mean, in the show, I get it, because there's more to explore. The world is bigger and rounder. The movie, I don't get it. No, this makes no sense. And there's not even modern stuff in the show.
I know, but, like, if it had been introduced, I could have seen, like, oh, maybe that's going to be referenced later. Mm-hmm. Like, I could have reasoned that and been like, oh, well, that's a fun little, like, tidbit. The movie doesn't need the tidbit.
No. But I do kind of get it. I mean, it's a foreboding of ways are changing. Nature's not always going to be there. But it does make me think, because, shocker, I'm already preparing for next Folktober.
Of course you are.
But I've been reading the complete Grimm's Fairy Tales, and Patrick Collum, in his introduction to it, wrote about how fairy tales and the stories of ye old times used to be, there was this rhythm of knowing, like, when it was at nighttime, this was going to be the start of this. And he brought up that once there was that rhythm of night and daytime, and, like, that night was when you had your fanciful stories and whatnot, and that's how you built community and taught lessons. But this doesn't work that way because we don't have that same rhythm. Because he also brought up that once we got electricity, that line between day and night was completely blurred.
Oh no, most certainly. Like, your chores and activities that happened when it was just candlelight versus night were vastly different. At some point, you had to go to bed because you couldn't see anymore. Yeah,
you didn't have Samuel L. Jackson telling you, go the fuck to sleep.
You didn't. Well, you might have. I don't know his life. But yeah, no, like, you could only do so much by candle or lamplight. Mm-hmm. And most of the time you were doing stuff that you couldn't do outside, like needlework or sewing or
you were usually around the fire because candles were expensive. And so were lamps.
They could be.
For the common people, it was expensive.
It depends on a little bit on where you are, but yeah, like, you had a limited light source, and the tasks that you could do at that light source were, you also had to do the inside chore at that point too, because you had to spend all day outside when it was daytime.
Back to Mushi-Shi. We finally get to the house, vamping up the pacing of a little bit because now it's an emergency. Mm-hmm. Good follow-up to other Mushi-Shi are just as dangerous, but in different ways, with the scribe's illness, sudden blind Mushi-Shi showing, and we get some more dumb exposition of some blind Mushi-Shi they've never heard of showing up in the Takayama story, and bringing up the term ginkgo and the eyeless fish, which there's such a stupid line. It's like, that's my name. Yeah,
it is a stupid line. Also, all of this exposition should have been at the beginning of the movie.
No, here's why I think it would have been better.
Okay.
It would have been better later on, because it's kind of late already, because the mystery's already killed it for us, because it's not...
For sure. The mystery's already solved.
Yeah, no, it's the opposite of Hitchcock's bomb and analogy, where you give the audience some information, but the characters don't know. But it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter here. There's no tension.
Well, Ginkgo's back history isn't like a ticking time bomb. It's it exists.
It does exist, and it also doesn't seem to be impacting his daily life. There's only a few lines in the movie where he talks about, like, I don't know my childhood. I don't remember it.
It's only in this part, really.
And, like, if it was something that clearly the character cared about, or, like, other characters bothered him a lot about, like, hey, don't you remember this? Didn't you play this as a kid? Like, and he was constantly telling them, like, I don't remember my childhood. I don't remember it. I don't care.
Yeah.
Then I would care. Then the backstories would maybe feel more impactful, because then he would have an emotional stake in it. Ginkgo doesn't seem to care that he doesn't remember his childhood.
No, not at all. And the one thing I do find interesting about the scene is that the Mushi spread by word like a disease a little bit.
That's true. Yeah. But I do like that, because it does tie into some of the old understandings of, like, health and disease, where people would assume that because you heard of a new thing, that's how it showed up, when in reality, it's probably someone sick who showed up and, like, coughed on you.
Yeah. Your blood's full of ghosts, you should do cocaine about it.
You should do cocaine about it. That does solve most people's problems. Arsenic also helps. But also, like, there's some very clear, like, imagery, at least, that the movie really leans into that the show kind of shows, but I feel like they leaned more into, like, the ethereal and bug-like elements, whereas this one, there's definitely some inspiration on, like, the idea of miasma, where it's, like, the bad air, and that's how, like, the CGI is kind of shown in some ways, of, like, that's how it's, like, becoming or, like, shown. And, like, the way he cures things is usually just to, like, pull the bad air out of people, or the bad, like, bug. And I think it's an interesting idea, because it does, like, tie into a bunch of historical ideas of, like, how we knew and understood disease, how, like, the worst small thing that most people could comprehend would be a parasite or a bug. But the show, like, doesn't lean into it quite enough. Like, we do spend a lot of time with other things happening, and I don't know how I feel about it, because it's a clear tie. It's just not a strong tie.
I think I know where your issue is there.
Okay.
Is the show is more people-based, and the movie is more Mushi-based.
I agree. I completely agree, because the show does a good job of, like, explaining it to a way where you didn't feel like you were learning, like, a weird history lesson.
No.
Where the movie almost feels like, hey, back in the day, look how crazy these people were.
Well, because the Mushi tie into, like, people's depression, dealing with loss. It's thematic within the episode of...
Yes, and there's not as much theme in the movie, I don't think.
No.
It's a little scattered.
No, and I mean, that's the other thing, too, is the show has the ability to tie into many other things, like... There's an episode about a girl born from the bamboo forest. Obviously tying into the bamboo cutter. Yeah,
there's a lot more legend, I think, in the show that the movie just is missing altogether.
No, and I think that's detrimental to it because it focuses too heavily on Ginkgo.
It does. It does. And Ginkgo doesn't even seem to care about Ginkgo.
No,
so
not at all. Because, I mean, he's honestly, even in this show, he is very much a nothing character. He's almost kind of like the narrator. And he just, we're along watching him trying to figure something out.
That's true. But it's not even like a narrator who's invested, like narrators telling me about penguins.
No.
He's just there.
No, but here's the thing. And this is going to be my second Columbo reference of the episode.
I'm so proud of you.
Because that's exactly how Columbo is set up. It's about the mystery. It's about the story.
Yep.
Columbo's just there kind of trying to figure it out we already know it, but we're invested in him solving the mystery, whereas Ginkgo, we don't know the mystery enough, but he's also our authoritarian perspective on this, and he doesn't feel like that at all this entire movie.
That is true. No, I agree. It sounds weird to say, but if this movie was shot a little bit more Columbo styled, it might have quelled many of my complaints about, like, not understanding where things were or what was happening, unless you had watched the show.
I mean, he's got a coat. It's not a trench coat, but it's close enough. He's one line away from being Columbo.
He is one line away from being Columbo. I won't lie. The outfit the outfit and the box, I think, were better explored in the show, and if you hadn't seen the show, they were very much lost on me in the movie until I watched the show. And then they felt more impactful and important. But yeah, just by movie understanding alone, you lost most of it because it just seems like a box with many drawers. Doesn't feel like an important enough item.
Yeah.
Same thing with most of the clothing and outfits that everyone wears.
It's just a medicine cabinet. Unless you open those drawers, you don't know what's going to be in there.
Exactly.
And back to the movie. They're to the archives, which I
do like the archives. The archives are cool.
I do. I agree. I don't know if it was just wind. It could have been.
Yeah.
But the tags closest to Ginkgo seem to be reaching out to them.
It does look cool.
Good hinting that the archives are alive.
Yes, I do wish there was a little more hint on the archives being alive, because I do think it was lost if you just watched the movie.
There's also a bit of trying to show that tragedy drives people, which is lost because we don't see that in any of the other characters.
No, honestly, from here until the end, most of the characters' interactions, unless directly stated, are completely lost, especially if you haven't seen the show.
No, exactly. And, I mean, it does... Because here's the thing, too, is, like, he's reading this shit, he's kind of having flashbacks, but not really. Because it's all this...
Because we've already learned it. We've already seen all of it.
No, exactly. And all this is just to round out Nui. And also give reason why the Mushi are attracted to Ginkgo is because he houses a Mushi in him for some reason.
Yeah, the movie does not explain this very well. No. But there's so much it doesn't explain that as someone who didn't know going in anything... You're already so confused, and there's so many details that are lost, especially here, because in the show, like this, they explain this much better, like what is happening, why the scrolls, all of that. Like the movie is just like, look, scrolls, magic writing, ooh, and you're just expected to like go with it.
Well, we don't even know it's magic writing now. As far as we know, they're scrolls until they become corrupted, and then it's like, okay, well now they're even having to rely on even older folk medicines because the scribe is dying / inks in her blood.
I like the ink in her blood analogy, but as the movie watcher, that's definitely what I came up with was like, oh, the ink is outside of her. She has ink poisoning, which was a real thing and a real problem at one point.
Because people lick the tip of their pens.
Yes.
Quills.
Yes. And the movie spends so much time focused on historical, potential comparisons with, health problems and medicine that the show doesn't really enhance or go into great detail on, because that's not the point of the show.
No.
But the movie spends so much time on it that I was like, oh, that's a really clever comparison and a great way to tie in ink poisoning to bugs, because the rest of the movie's been bug-esque and parasite-like.
Yeah.
And so that's a cool tie-in, and I liked it, I enjoyed it. And then I watched the show, and I was like, what the frick was all that?
Yeah, well, because that's the thing is, this scene has a lot of cool elements to it. One, I do actually like the whole folk medicine of, we gotta stab her and bleed her out. So
again, old-timey medicine said if it can't be fixed with arsenic or poisoning, you just need to bleed.
Yeah.
Leeches everywhere. Yeah. And also, there was a device that they would put on you, and they'd stab you with a bunch of little needles. And you just bleed. And that definitely didn't cause anyone to die, ever.
I think they call them tattoo guns now.
It'd be a very, very ugly tattoo, but yeah.
But, I mean, here's the thing, is, I think there are some interesting stuff. Finally, the rainbow dude is useful, but...
Yeah, kinda.
The tone of this changes so drastically to almost a horror level of...
And again, we had the spooky eyeballs earlier. We now have spooky blood tattoo book ink problems. These are good. This is, as someone who didn't watch the show and watched the movie first, I enjoyed those two bits the most.
We got darkness seeking warmth.
Yep.
And I also really like this idea that the stories of these Mushi are alive and in their own right. They're Mushi themselves, which is this interesting concept of...
Yeah, no, I loved that.
Well, and it's also that, it's this idea that in the book, I think it was in the Book of Yokai, where they were talking about how yokai were created is oh, there's a knocking on your window. It must be, you give that phenomenon a name. And that's how this feels, is that these texts, because you're able to write them, you're giving life to an inanimate object or something that...
Yes, once you've named it, it has life.
Yeah, you give it a name, it has power, it has its secret name. I'm not going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fucking cats. Jesus Christ.
But no, that is a lore element that we see throughout many cultures, and I liked that. I liked that it was kind of brought back around. Once I watched the show and realized that a lot of the show's elements are more aligned with that style of incorporating all these other legends and these other standard beliefs or thoughts that a lot of people share. I was like, oh, we spent so much time on the medicine stuff though in the movie. Which I also like, don't get me wrong. It's just, it feels like almost two different ideas.
Yeah, well, and even at times, I think that's the thing that they do try a little bit later on, is that Ginkgo has a little bit of helplessness.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, especially in the episode where we have the snake god that kills the mountain god and takes over the mountain. Beautiful episode.
Yes.
Just chilling and just like, he just sits there admiring honestly, the terrifying thing that is.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
But we never get that.
No.
At all.
There is the helplessness in the movie pales in comparison to what the show eventually gets to and like starts to explain. And I do think it's a little disappointing. If you were a fan of the show, coming to the movie, I could see a lot of the complaint and disappointment. Coming from the movie first, I didn't have too much trouble because I didn't know there was more.
No.
So far, this is the worst thing that has happened, and by the end of the movie, it's honestly still one of the like top things that has happened. So like, there's not like a build. There's not like a hint that there are other bigger things out there.
No, and okay, so here's the part where I think would have worked, because Ginkgo does become a little bit comatose after another flashback, and I'll get to
More
the flashback
flashbacks.
in just a second. I think him going comatose would have been a good way of him reclaiming his memories.
Mm-hmm.
It would have changed the pace of the movie quite a bit and made it more concise.
I agree.
And then we could have gotten his entire backstory, and then he comes out of it, he's like, oh shit, I remember everything.
That would have been better.
Instead,
that would have been so much better. We could have squeezed in another little mini adventure too to explain more of the Mushi.
Exactly. Instead, we get a dumbass flashback that Nui survives somehow because she broke the dam and they all escaped. And like
I hate that and like this is something that I thought maybe was a bad translation, and I don't think it is. I think it's just the movie doing a bad storytelling. Her surviving bothers me immensely. Her being changed into a Mushi that other people still care for would have made more sense, and I think that's honestly what the movie shows, but the movie does not say that. Those words do not come out of people's mouths.
Well, and that's the thing is, granted, I haven't finished Mushi-Shi, the show, and I've never read the manga, but
sure,
her disappearing is just as good as being mysterious, like not bringing her back. But the other thing that annoys me too is Ginkgo's only blind in one eye. Yeah. Even if he was recovering from quote unquote shock, he didn't hear her at all.
Yeah.
Like, she's blind, but he could still hear it. Like, it just makes absolutely, in a show that doesn't have any logic, or a movie that doesn't have much logic to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the show has logic, it's just folk logic.
It doesn't explain it. He kind of like wanders off like he's in a daze, which like if that had been the explanation, I could have been more okay. But she's already done all the experimenting for us. We've already got the like understanding of how this demon / Mushi works.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing too is like they're built up as a mother-son kind of vibe.
Yeah,
doesn't work because now she wants him. Now she's leaning on him because she needs him at this point, and it just doesn't work because she drove him. The last scene we saw was her driving. Well, the scene before that was her driving him away, and it's just like you didn't build up any of their relationship. Spend 30 minutes of concentrated work just building up their relationship in what could have been the only flashback of the movie, which I would have been okay with, because it's Ginkgo in a comatose.
It would have made a lot more sense, because, it also, like, doesn't help that, like, she has been presented as this expert on this Mushi, and yet, when what we get told afterwards, despite her doing all this research and all this study and losing people to it, and like witnessing it for so long, we then get told the thing we get shown afterwards does not match with what we were told at the beginning would happen.
We forgot to bring up her whole story of being obsessed with this because her husband rerouted water to save their village and end up consuming him and their son. Yeah, like, which, not a bad backstory, but like, she's supposed to be the expert on this. We've been told how this is supposed to happen, and yet she's wrong, because she doesn't die. Yeah. She doesn't get turned, and like, she doesn't even get turned into the thing she says you're going to get turned into. She gets turned into a muck monster that kind of remembers who she is. She's kind of like No Face. A little bit, which if that's the way they had leaned, I could have been very into. Like, you get turned into a husk of yourself, that could have been fine. Oh, you get turned into, like,
the mud, the water that the creature lived in. Sure. But no, that's not what anyone says.
No.
They're like, she lived. And you're like, I would like to beg to differ.
Well, we already knew she lived because we saw her 2 scenes before this, reciting the story of all this shit.
True, but again, she's so crusty that, like, I genuinely felt like the script, the dialogue, did not match what was happening on screen.
No. Because
they kept saying, like, she's fine, she's herself, she's alive. Like, they are, like, multiple times saying that to the audience. And yet, you are looking with your eyes and you're like, you are like, no. No. Unless she's really into mud facials all of a sudden, that woman is a crusty mud puddle that happens to be sentient.
She's consumed by the darkness.
Which would have been fine. If this had been a Kingdom Hearts reference, I would have been okay with it.
I am so glad you caught on to exactly where I was going with that.
No, if this whole thing, if she had been a Heartless or a nobody, I could have been so into that.
She is Riku to Ginkgo as Sora.
I could have been down because part of the reason, despite everyone's upsetness with how stupid the way the storytelling in Kingdom Hearts works, the base storyline does have some interest and, like, intrigue, right?
Yeah.
That's why people keep playing it, other than the fact that we're all emo edgelords. Let's not lie to ourselves. That's why we started, was because we all thought we were cool Hot Topic kids.
I started because it was fun and had Final Fantasy in it.
Final Fantasy nerd, see? You're one of us. Welcome, edgelord.
Hey, excuse me. I played Kingdom Hearts before I was in my emo phase.
That's how we all started, don't worry.
Yes, I'm aware.
That's how we all began.
I played Chain of Memories on Game Boy Advance when people didn't even know what it was. Thank you very much.
You wear the crown amongst us. But no, like, the at the root of it, the reason Kingdom Hearts is popular is because the base story is interesting. The idea of how these characters are created, the idea of, like, having a name makes you somebody, having a heart makes you someone else. That, like, all of that has some basis in Mushi because of the way the Mushi works.
Yeah.
And yet, they were just like, nope, she's fine. She just looks like this now. And I'm like, I can't agree with you. No. I can't get behind this.
Well, and that's the other thing, too, is, like, for some reason, after this entire thing, Ginkgo is now in comatose. And it just...
I don't get that. I'm not gonna lie.
No, I don't either. He becomes a nothing character for, like, another 10, 15 minutes, and it was all... We all get just... we get a little exposition of being provided the direction to find the Koki to wash off the Takoyami that inhabits Ginkgo.
Sure, that part bothered me less just because it did fit in with the earlier part of the movie.
Yeah, you're kind of following the quote-unquote trail of light that we never actually see in this movie, which
we don't.
They should have added at some point.
They hint at it. They just never, like, properly get into it because we're too busy with, like, his backstory.
Yeah.
But, okay, the other thing that bothered me, and I know it's petty, and I know it's because this is, even though it is a more down-to-life, like, more quote-unquote realistic anime, the girl who has been stabbed, our ink lady, is now bleeding out regularly to the point where she is constantly passing out trying to save him, yeah? Yeah. She should be fucking dead.
No, they cut it off after she bled out the ink.
Yeah, and then she walks back in there with her magic chopsticks. And
cool as shit, though.
It was very dope.
It is a cool scene. That is one of the best scenes in this entire movie.
It is a fantastic scene. However, she passes out like 3 times, and they're like, "Oh no, she's too ill to continue. Her arm is bleeding everywhere." And they scoop her up and they take her out, and then not even 5 seconds of the movie later, she's back at it again. And I'm like, is she getting blood transfusions in the back? Like, what's happening?
So here's the thing: is where the editing and interweaving of the story doesn't work is because she loves Ginkgo. And we don't
get that at all.
No, we do. We get it because after Ginkgo goes comatose and we're told, like, oh, follow this trail, we get a flashback to Ginkgo taking care of her. And it doesn't add much to the story other than, like, add this, like, connection and hint, there might be a future between them.
Okay, as someone who firmly believes that more stories should have just mutual guys and girls. Like, I am a big fan of Miyazaki's belief that just because there's a guy and a girl in a movie, they don't need to be in love. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge fan of that.
They can be in love, but it's a platonic love.
I'm down for expanding the horizons of what 2 characters can do in a movie.
Yep.
That's my preferred default at this point, because I'm tired of just the only girl character being in love with the only guy character in a movie. I'm sick of it. So my new default is they are friends until they kiss. And even then, we still might be friends.
Yeah, it's a fleeting thing of you're caught up in the emotion.
Sure, you know? So, like, the fact that they show them caring, but we've also shown that Ginkgo is a caring person.
Mm-hmm.
He does this for lots of people.
For all we know, he didn't get paid for curing the horned girl.
Exactly. He might have done a discount, like, we don't know. But
I felt he did that job for the story, so he could tell the story.
It was a pretty good story. So, like, the only time that the movie is like, no, they are explicitly in love with each other and refuse to, like, actually be in love with each other is when he's like, I love her. And his friend's like, oh, you gotta go after her, man. He's like, no, I could never. And I'm like, why? Why? Also, the in love bit was not made clear. I'm sorry.
No, it was a very short bit. It was them talking about the future. That's what I mean by they're in love with each other.
It was a bullshit piece. And it also didn't help that we don't have a whole lot of Mushi-Shi to base relationships off of, because the only other Mushi-Shi that we properly know is Potman. And Potman is the stupidest Mushi-Shi. He's chasing leprechaun rainbows.
Potman is not a Mushi-Shi.
I think he might...
No, he's not. He is just...
He's just a Potman?
No. We learn later on, he's just a carpenter. That's all
he wants to become one.
No, he's the son of a carpenter. He is trained to be a carpenter. He is not a Mushi-Shi. He is a peasant.
Then we have no basis for how Mushi-Shi act between each other. So, like, there is no good basis for this relationship.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because after that flashback, we're back on the road.
Yeah.
And Ginkgo is slow and comatose. And we cut to some little bit of Nui. And, oh yeah, she's traveling with a mute guy who thought they were going to get money for telling their story.
Yeah, sure. I don't remember.
And she's clinging to a child that she thinks is Ginkgo for some reason. Like, I don't even know where this mute guy comes from. He's just there. He's
literally just there for like a half second.
Yeah. And honestly, like a second later, too.
Well, and his character is so poorly explained that the move, like, as someone who didn't know what was happening, I was like, oh, are we supposed to know this man? No, The answer is no, but the movie, like, the way they portray him, you are so confused as just a movie watcher.
No, exactly. And it doesn't go anywhere, because right after this, it's just Ginkgo and Nijiro chilling. As we explained Nijiro's family history, this is where we learn he's the son of a carpenter. And, like, it's like, I don't, like...
It doesn't even feel like a partying of friends, either.
No, well, the big thing is like, it's just like, we've been with this character. He's been part of the movie for about an hour at this point.
Which is for most of the movie, honestly.
And now we're learning his history?
And, like, I could have understand if he had either A, been more likable and had, like, made a bigger impact, or was, like, in the whole movie.
Yeah.
He can be the same level of useless and, like, background character, but if he's in the whole movie, then at that point I would have felt like we were finally saying goodbye.
No.
I don't know anything about this man, but we're going to say goodbye.
Well,
but now it's, I don't know anything about him, I don't care about him, and we're saying goodbye.
Yeah, well, we're not even saying goodbye yet, because Ginkgo's a little bit standoffish, kind of hinting that he wants to be back to traveling alone.
Sure.
There is a nice little progression of evidence of him cleansing through the hot springs, that, hey, he is healing, he's able to practice. So that shows some stuff. And then we're just blatantly told that it's rain mixing with the Koki to make the rainbow snake.
Whoa.
And they find a valley with a bunch of Mushi-Shi gathering, which this is the part that made me... Yeah, it made me think of Mayfly columns, again, going back to Insect Master. But it also shows that there's a little bit where Nijiro feels like he says that he is feeling better, showing that being around nature, that level of nature, has some type of healing effects. And there's a cool rain shot.
This part of the movie looks the best.
Yeah.
It looks fantastic.
We get to see this rainbow snake. It's a beautifully well done scene.
It is.
It's just, this is like the one of like 3 Mushi-Shi we see this entire movie.
Yeah, and it's not super clear, like, that it's meant to be hinting that there are bigger and more Mushi-Shi out there. Because the way that it's shot and the way that you, like, get explained it as just a movie watcher, it feels so solo. It feels so isolated. In the same way that rainbows are.
Yeah.
that you don't have that feeling of like, oh, there's bigger things out there. There's more out there. You're just like, oh, the little bugs make a big bug. Wow.
Or they make a conglomeration that feels like a big bug, kind of like a schooling of fish.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it means nothing because it's time to split and to stop chasing their dreams.
That was a weird message, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand it, even after I watched the show.
Yeah, you get his whole backstory like 2 minutes ago, or 5 minutes ago, and now they're splitting up, and it's like, I'm sorry that we gotta go. Come and find me when you get a chance.
And it's such a strange goodbye, too, because, like, first off, the audience has no connection to this guy. Mm-hmm. He's barely part of the group. You barely know anything about him. You don't care about this guy.
No.
And apparently Ginkgo doesn't either, because he doesn't even wave when he leaves. He's just like, bye, bitch.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be emotional, but it's so broken up from everything else that's been happening that it doesn't feel like he and Ginkgo had a real connection at all.
It feels like a one-sided friendship where, like, Ginkgo didn't actually like him, which the rest of the movie doesn't portray it that way. I think it was meant to be a little different, but that's the way it feels, because Ginkgo's just, like, marching off into the sunset while his friend screams at him.
Yeah, no, because right after this, we cut to Ginkgo walking through a cool forest shot.
It is.
But he's trudging along, and he just happens to stumble upon the mute Inui in a dilapidated shack. Like, there's not any build up to them meeting. It's just like, oh, I stumbled upon you, which I would get if it was more episodic of a series. Like, okay, well, this is the last chapter. It's like, if it had
been chapterized.
If we had the chapter of him doing the snow, him doing the word woman, then we have the flashback, then we do the rainbow travel, then we cut to this.
As it could have felt more like a cycle.
Yeah, a little bit more progression of we have a whole chapter of getting to know his relationship with Nui to now, oh shit, in his multiple journeys, he finally stumbled upon her. We've had 3 other journeys.
That would have made so much more sense. Also, the side character traveling with Nui is so poorly explained in the movie that you genuinely do not understand what is happening. You don't understand who he is. No. He's just there, mouth open, screaming.
No, it makes no sense. And on top of that, like, they kind of hint that they're sucking the life out of these boys because he's carrying the corpse or the husk or something.
Okay, as just a movie watcher, I genuinely could not tell what was happening. I assumed, because I was having such a hard time accepting that Nui was alive and well and fine. I was like, oh, she's turned into a monster and she's eating children.
Yeah.
That was the only explanation I could think of, and yet the movie regularly is like, no, this is Nui. She's back to herself.
No, exactly. And that is the thing, is like the mute, like, Ginkgo shows up, and the mute is like the guy at the end of the remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Ooh!
He makes so little sense as to what he is doing, why he is there, who he is in any capacity, that he almost shouldn't exist.
Yeah, no, exactly. He doesn't exist because he doesn't do shit, because
he doesn't do anything.
Ginkgo goes right into the shack.
Literally doesn't do anything.
No, exactly. Other than dispose of the dead boy.
Which is weird, because it shows that like Nui hasn't taken on someone that like she feels pity on. Like, if it is truly Nui and she's not a lake monster, then it's not her taking on someone else who is in, the worst spot in their life, right? No, she's just found a little slave man who doesn't know what he's doing.
It makes me think of Voldemort and Wormtongue.
A little bit. At least Wormtongue had more, like, autonomy.
Yeah. No, exactly. Wormtongue was
he
more
murdered people on his own accord. He didn't get told to do that.
He was more of a character than this guy.
He's 100% more than a character.
And, like, we don't get anything because even though he's just, like, groans at...
He literally just points and yells.
Yeah. We were only told that Nui is kind of encapsulated in the Takoyami now, but that awakens the Ginkgo in Ginkgo.
It doesn't make any sense. I'm not gonna lie. I was confused, but I did enjoy myself for the rest of this movie. I know I complained this whole time, but I did enjoy it. Visually, it was nice. I was confused, but I put my confusion up to the fact that I hadn't watched the show. This last part of the movie infuriated me.
Yeah, no.
To the point where I went on Google to find other people who were mad to see what their reviews were like, because maybe I was missing something. Maybe I was the problem. And I learned I am not the problem.
No. And here's the thing. So, like, this is the first time we're introduced to the stream of light, and we have 5 minutes left in this movie.
It is literally the very end.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, like, we get this, like, horror-esque moment. And
Which was
then
kind of cool looking.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I like the mood of it. I love horror. So anytime you can get that in a non-horror film, kudos. But Ginkgo carries her to some random secluded spot and cleanses her?
Yeah, I didn't get it. I did not understand what was happening. I thought that he was going to take her out back and shoot her like a diseased animal.
He kind of does.
He kind of does, but he also doesn't, because the whole time this movie is, like, not being honest with what is happening on screen.
No. Well, that's the thing, is, like, it felt like they wrote themselves in the corner, and they're just like, fuck it, this is gonna do it. The rest of the series is mysterious. No, we will be mysterious. Because he says...
just wanders off and disappears.
We haven't even gotten there yet.
It's so upsetting.
Well, because, like, that's the thing, is, like, he's summoning the Mushi-Shi to cure her because life will fight it. And
I don't understand that, because he's not been able to do that before.
Well, and I don't know does she die? What happens to the mute? The mute's just kind of following them. The guy who is afraid of Ginkgo now is like, okay, I will carry your pack for you, good master.
Yeah, no. Literally, this whole ending part made no sense to me.
No.
I did not understand who anyone was, what was happening. I'm not even convinced that that's Nui anymore.
Okay, so I unfortunately might have an explanation, because yes, Ginkgo after this just walks into a river, like walks off by a riverbed and disappears. Literally
like an 80s TV show, fades into the background.
Yeah. Well, okay, so here's my thought.
Okay.
Because the lore with the Takoyami is that supposedly it will take whoever comes in contact with it eventually, not right away. That's why the fish have one eye. Yeah. That's why Nui has one eye.
Sure, but like the symbolism was there.
Yeah, but it's not... that's the thing, is like, you have all this exposition in this movie, and you say fuck all about this.
Yeah, no, you change the magic system, essentially.
Yeah, and it just gets washed away with everything. Here's the thing, is it's just lazy writing. They didn't know how to end the movie, and they just...
I agree.
Okay, he disappears into time in history.
And this is where that really frustrates me, because I understand how it is difficult to show that a episodic thing is over, but the characters continue. However, there are countless examples that could be pulled from to have a better version of that ending.
I got an idea for it. Post-credit. He disappears, but you do post-credit scenes of him helping further people and tying into the other episodes. Like, it's a shitty way to tie it in, but it's a way to say that he goes on still, instead of just vanishing.
Or even just do the Western thing where he walks into the sunset, and that's how the movie ends and the credits roll. I know it's corny, but you know what? It fucking works.
No, exactly. High Noon Drifter. They could have done that exact ending, or that style of ending, and it would have worked so well.
Hell, even introducing a narrator into the movie, so that at the end, someone can say, and then he continued on, would have been just fine.
So my brother keeps sending me these Pokemon World.
Yes.
I want a David Attenborough Mushi-Shi.
That'd be great, actually. I'd be down.
Even if it's just like a 5-minute clip.
I think that'd be very funny.
Yeah. But I know, it's just such an odd...
It's a terrible ending, and even for people who were fans of the show before they watched the movie, from everything I've read, and now having seen the show, it doesn't make any sense. Even if you go in knowing that this is not the end of the show, that there is more that could be happening, like that it's very episodic and that's why it's like him fading away. The movie makes it seem like he dies. He ascends to heaven.
Not even that, like...
just stops existing. It doesn't feel like he's moving on. It feels like he ceases to exist.
That's the thing, is like they could have made it feel like he fades back into the river of life, like everything in the movie's supposed to be, because where life flourishes is where the river of life is closest to the surface.
Hell, go back to the swarm of mayfly Mushi and like have him disappear into that cloud.
Go back to the pond.
Yes, literally anywhere. Literally
the drain pond, but...
I mean... lay down in the mud and let it consume you. I don't care. Do something, though.
But here's the thing, is like, it's such an odd combination of 4 episodes from a 26-episode series.
Yes.
That, while I think all the stories are great in their standalone plots, it's just oddly put together. Like, the Un and the Ah are honestly a great starting point to introduce the world.
Yeah.
the Tanya and the recording is a great way to build the collection of stories and try and give Ginkgo some kind of interest and develop him, give him a reason to stay and carry on.
Yeah.
But the Nijiro and the Rainbow it's an alright way to partially give Ginkgo a traveling companion. But they do fuck all with it.
He doesn't need a traveling companion, though. No. At least not in the movie.
Well, and that's the thing is, in the show, he does travel with him, but it's a very short... It's an episode. It is. It's
an episode. And it also adds something to Ginkgo, into Ginkgo's character as far as, like, connecting him back with humanity and trying to, like, explore on, like, his relationships and why he feels like he needs to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, it's not explored, like, super heavily, but like those themes are brought up, whereas in the movie you just feel like you have a stray dog following Ginkgo around everywhere.
No, exactly, and the stray dog has to take care of him at some point.
Yeah, which is kind of boring.
Well, maybe that's the point of the mute, is the mute's supposed to like kind of mirror Ginkgo, and
it's just not a strong enough connection though.
No, exactly. And even then the story of Ginkgo and Nui they're semi building the world, but it's interjected at such odd points that it just doesn't work.
It really doesn't. Like, I wanted to like this movie because I had been excited to see Mushi-Shi. I had specifically put it off when we said we were going to do this. I'd put off watching it because I did this on purpose because I wanted to be the guinea pig. And so I put off watching it because I wanted to see the movie first, get my toes wet, and also to see the movie for the movie itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I had also heard that people really liked the acting in this. The actors, minus one, I have really liked their other works. I've also really liked the director's other works. So I was very excited to see this, even though it had gotten some bad reviews. I was like, well, most live actions get bad reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's over stuff that I really don't care about.
Yeah.
This one, though, it was really hard to look past. It was super confusing, even after I had watched the show. And the parts that were really pretty were honestly, like, drowned out over fuzzy background flashbacks.
Well, and I think the biggest thing is that it lacks the care that each episode gives in exploring different subjects of the human condition.
Oh,
or, like,
definitely.
Exploring the subject of loss or exploring the subject of hopelessness. Like, it doesn't have any of that, and instead it just is a generic folklore story.
Yeah.
That, I'm going to say story loosely, because it really doesn't tie into anything. There's nothing to learn from any of this that folklore should have. Even Mushi-Shi has, like, the show has things to learn from.
It does. It definitely does. And granted, I understand why some people weren't a fan of the show, Mushi-Shi, because it was a very soft and, like, not overly explanative story as far as, like, character development or relationships or lessons to be learned, which is honestly usually a pretty heavy part of an anime.
Or folklore in general.
True. And the movie was so lightly in its touch, where, like, there's clearly someone saw elements of, like, the grieving and wanted to bring that in, and yet it's so lightly touched and, like, thought about in the movie that you lose it completely. Which is disappointing, because visually, it would have worked really well.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes down to A, editing. The flashbacks way too much. And B, unfortunately, and granted, maybe this is just a sub-dub problem, I don't know, but at least for an English watcher, the dialogue was pretty bad.
That's the thing, is, like, the dialogue is, I would say, probably 30 to 40% exposition on trying to explain the Mushi-Shi in the world.
Which could have been fine. It could have been fine. Because there's not a ton of talking in this movie. There's a lot of showing, which is fine. And the explanations that we do get, while sometimes we're overdone, the acting that went with it and the dialogue given was good. It just, none of it matched with what was on screen.
But just condense it down into a couple parts.
Definitely. And also look at the film while you're writing the script, because people kept saying stuff, and yet what was on screen did not match. And not in the, lazy editing, lazy, like, translation sort of way. I know that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing with the exposition, is do it to people who don't know. Because while Nui and Ginkgo, like, Ginkgo as a kid doesn't know a bunch of stuff, it doesn't work because Ginkgo's supposed to be this authoritarian that we know of.
Yeah.
That he's explaining the Mushi to the Snow Village. And that's the last explanation. Well, we get a bunch more explanations, but they're all, like, little that doesn't really build anything.
No. Once we stop with the girl with the horns, the building of the Mushi ends, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And that's disappointing, because that was kind of the best part of the show, was the fact that it does build as far as, like, scale and danger and, like, impact that the Mushi can have.
To a point. I mean, and that's the thing is, like, every single episode is just so unique, and it's interesting in their own world, even if they're barely connected to each other through that river of light.
True. And that was the other thing. The show, once I got to it, while subtle, does a really nice job of visual, like, cues and ties throughout the whole show. They do a great job with color palette. They do a really nice job with tying in different elements that either tie specifically to that episode or to Ginkgo in general. The movie tried with the fish, but it's so loose and it's in only flashbacks that it doesn't work. And that's really upsetting, because there's some really great spots we could have added it.
No, exactly. Like I've said, there's been some beautiful shots. It's just, it's such interlaced with uninteresting dog shit.
Unfortunately, yeah. I really wanted to like Mushi-Shi. I tried very hard to try and like Mushi-Shi. I didn't like Mushi-Shi.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I completely get that. I mean, it just, it's lacking in character and depth that actually makes it interesting. It's such a light play on what could have been, I guess.
And the other thing that I judge live actions for, and I know it's not fair for everyone, but to me it's an important characteristic, is, did the movie make me want to watch the actual show? In any capacity. Even if the movie is garbage, like Death Note. I at least wanted to rewatch Death Note after that. No, I didn't want to watch Mushi-Shi. I watched it because I knew it was better than this, because you and other friends and other people I know online have watched Mushi-Shi the show and recommended it heavily to me. It was already on my watch list. If I had just gone into this like I normally do, with being kind of blind, being somewhat interested in a show but not wanting to spoil it right out, wanting to watch the movie to see if I even like the characters, this would not have appealed to me. No. I would not have watched the show.
I completely understand that. And I mean, I honestly wouldn't have watched the movie if it wasn't for the show on the opposite side, because Mushi-Shi was one of the first animes I watched when I moved back stateside. So.
Sure. You weren't the only one, though, who didn't watch this movie. A lot of people didn't. And not just because of when this came out in 2006, which, granted, now it's a lot easier to get your hands and find a live-action adaptation of just about anything.
No, I'm going to argue against there. I've been trying so hard to find, like, 20 different live-action adaptations that only came out in Japan.
I know, a lot of them only came out in Japan.
They are the biggest pain in the ass to find, and this is why I'm trying to learn the languages, so I can just buy the foreign DVD and not have to worry about
I totally get that.
subtitles.
But it is something that is now easier to get, especially for the big ones, like Attack on Titan, like the actual big ones.
Yeah.
The getting a hold of a movie, even if it's not live adaptation, is getting very easy. Especially if you're into just the really big ones, just the really popular ones in the US. Granted, if you're into something a little bit more unique or older, you're still gonna have trouble.
Still trying to find that Katakawa under the bridge, or what? I can't remember the dude's first name. It's the one with the weird people under the bridge.
Oh yeah, I know which one you're talking about. Yeah, Mushi-Shi happened in a weird time where it was not unheard of to have live action. Anime was popular, and not just like nerdy, not even just nerdy kids like it. It was actively popular enough that everyone knew at least what Naruto was.
I'm going to argue against you there. The movie came out in 2006.
It did.
I was a sophomore in high school. We weren't the cool... Anime was not as big.
It's not as big as it was now, but... I was there too. However, it was easier to get than it was before.
Yeah.
Getting a hold of Ghibli was not unheard of, and it also wasn't, like, weird.
It was easier to get... Ghibli was more acceptable. Everything else outside of Ghibli was
with the
easier
exception
to
of
get.
A couple. There was few that, like, were by this point mainstream. They were in Hot Topic.
It was easier to get along a certain line if it was the big shonen or if it was Sailor Moon.
Yes.
That was, like, your extent of what you were getting.
Oh, no, for sure. However, Mushi-Shi was fairly popular. Granted, it didn't really hit its stride until much later in the US. However, even by that point, it should have been easy enough to get a hold of in the US that lots of people should have seen this movie.
No.
And nobody did.
I'm going to argue against that because...
Not when it came out in 2020. Like, Mushi-Shi had a resurgence. People were interested. This movie is out there, and it is in English, and it is honestly not that hard to get compared to some movies.
No, I agree. It's not that hard. I've had to search for a lot.
And even by today's Google standards, the number of people who are Mushi-Shi fans who have seen this movie is very low. And part of that's because I don't think people know it exists. And part of it is because it's that bad.
Well, and I also think there's still that major aversion to live actions. Like, I will say, don't get me wrong, the Attack on Titan live action is not good, but I love it.
They at least put effort into it.
Well, because the movie tried to be something different. And that's the thing, is like, Mushi-Shi doesn't try to be very different from its original source material.
No, it doesn't. And I do think that, especially by nowadays standards, seeing something that is made in Japan with Japanese director, writers, and actors is
made for a Japanese audience on top of that.
Is usually, at least by like nerd standards, a little bit better than like an American adaptation where we're known to butcher pretty badly.
Death Note, Dragon Ball, Avatar.
We don't talk about that one. But so, like, the fact that this movie is both that badly rated and also this poorly, like, found and watched, the amount of reviews I was finding for it was surprisingly low. This movie is bad enough that people normally would pick up a pen and immediately go typing about how they hated it. There's not as many reviews as I thought there should be.
And I think maybe because, one, it's not that mainly distributed as you think it would. And also, it's not as atrocious as, like, Dragon Ball.
It's not. It's not a westernized, terrible recreation movie by any means.
It's just a piss-poor adaptation.
It is, and I think that's a bit disappointing because, especially with Mushi-Shi having a bit of a resurgence recently, and people being back and interested in it, I see it talked about pretty regularly, and it's advertised to me once again, even though I haven't actively been, like, looking for it or, like, searching for it. It means that people are interested. And while this movie's not good, it's at least not that bad that I would assume people would be put off right from the get-go.
Yeah, no, I completely...
People would give it a go and then realize it's bad.
Yeah, no, I get that. It has a lot going for it initially. It just doesn't...
It doesn't deliver.
Yes, no, exactly.
And honestly, I could have forgiven the first hour, almost hour and a half of this movie. The last 10 minutes were most of my beef. My true anger was felt in the last 10 to 15 minutes. The rest was just like, oh, well, now that I've seen the show, I'm confused. Or the fact I hadn't seen the show, I was confused. But that's overlookable. I watch more garbage than that regularly.
No, I was the exact same way as, like, I had watched the show, and I started watching the movie again, because it's been a while since I'd seen it, and I'm like, this isn't as bad as I remember. And then I got to, like, that 34 or that hour and a half point. I'm like, you lost me.
I unfortunately agree.
So, Chris, good, bad, weird, how do you rate this movie?
I was hoping, when I originally put this DVD into my player, to be saying that this was a good and weird. However, it's just bad. And it's kind of upsetting to say, because the acting's really good. Mushi-Shi the show is very good. Visually, it looks passable most of the time and good at other times. But the problems are too big. Yeah. It's just bad.
It's the narrative. I have to give it a bad weird because while I do like a lot of shots of the movie, I think there's a lot of cool things it has going for it. It's just so poorly constructed and it's weirdly put together that it just isn't there for me for what I wanted. Or what I want in a movie in general. It barely, that's the thing is, it barely feels like a movie. It feels like you took point A, point B, point C, and you threw it all together.
I agree. I completely can agree.
So would you recommend Mushi-Shi the movie, Chris?
Not unless you feel like torturing yourself or you're a super big Mushi-Shi fan that feels the need to say you've seen everything ever created for it.
Or an Otomo fan.
I mean, that's the thing. That's what's upsetting. The acting is really good. The directing is good. It's just the plot is bad, even by, episodic TV show standards. And whatever the dialogue script that is happening through the last 30 minutes is bad. Exposition.
A little bit of acting. Exposition. Yeah, no, I that's the thing. I don't know if I can even recommend this movie to anyone. And granted, I watched this while I was waiting for my parents to wake up, so...
Yeah, it's just so disappointing that it's hard to, think of anyone who would benefit from seeing this.
benefit from how not to put together an anthological series.
I could...
The positive to the negative.
I suppose this would be a great example of some errors to maybe avoid.
No, exactly. But now it's that time of the show. Season 6 bingo. New season, new game. Well, halfway through new season, new game. Chris and I are playing bingo, and you can too. Rules are simple. 1 stamp per card per episode. Cards can be found on our social media at TGTBTW_podcast on Instagram and Threads, and TGTBTW podcast on Twitter. Or feel free to email to request at tgtbtw@gmail.com. You can use any of the 3 bingo card variations, but each stamp must be associated with a episode from season 6 or microview or whatever. First place has already been taken, so second place gets to choose a deep dive and a microview. Third place gets to choose 2 microviews, and fourth and fifth place get to choose a microview. So feel free to share at us on social media or email us to participate. Rules are slightly different for Chris and myself. We get 2 stamps per deep dive. Feel free to, or first one to get bingo on any of their cards, good, bad, or weird, gets to choose a movie that they feel fits that category of movie for season 7. So what do you got for us, Chris?
Under my bad card, it still bothers me, even after watching this movie so many times. The pointless romance on my bad edition will be my choice for the first one.
Good choice.
My second one, I have thought long and hard. The flute music, out of nowhere, will have to be my choice.
That is a good one. I think I'm going to have to... I'm on a weird card. I think I'm going to have to go with flute music, even though I've referenced Columbo twice in this episode.
You did. But man, that flute music was really out of left field.
I am very hard pressed on this next one. Bad. Flashbacks. Never mind.
I saw it out of the corner of my eye, and I knew it was for you.
Yeah, it just... God, there's so much bad... Like, there's so much nothing to this movie that's going on.
Yeah, which is honestly too bad, because the show is very good.
Yeah, and kind of a bad way to end the pregame on a deep dive, but fear not, we do have a bonus micro review, so look forward to that coming out later this month.
Definitely.
And also, I am very excited for Folktober, because we are really getting up into the super spooky Japanese ghosts and shit.
I am aware. You've been telling me about it for a while.
Oh, I'm so excited. I love this topic. I'm also partially excited because my brother's entering his tattoo apprenticeship where he's learning about Japanese shit, so we're talking about history and stuff.
The bonding.
Oh yeah, we're big nerds about this shit, so it's super cool. But everyone get ready for the spookiest of seasons. I'm going to try 31 Days of Folktober. No reviews this year, but I'll be at least posting what I'm watching.
You enjoy that? I bought myself more Murder, She Wrote DVDs and will be consuming season 12.
Gosh, you enjoy that.
I will.
But, anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace! Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.